Don't you for until Wednesday. Tell Frankie about it. That's week 8. Somebody fill it in. You gotta have a place to sit. I moved the exam to week 8. You don't need a password. Just scroll down for week 8. You'll see it. You have 48 hours starting now to do it.
Right now?
Right. You can start doing it now for all I care. I have no idea what you're doing behind those screens. I mean, you're short of looking at something inappropriate, but I mean, you could be watching the latest episode of whatever, watching silly things on whatever you guys watch, YouTube, TikTok, whatever, X, formerly known as something else, probably Y or Z. Nobody cares, Lou. Nobody thinks you're funny. On with the show. So, digestion of lipids. The key is emulsification. That's what bile salts are. Bile salts are basically cholesterol-laden molecules that have been altered in such a way to make them effectively have a bipolar component. And so effectively what emulsifiers do is emulsifiers take fats and because they are bipolar, they have a fat soluble and a water soluble portion. It's almost like they stick. The fat soluble portion and the water soluble portion protrudes and effectively they can separate. That's what emulsification is. It's relatively stable. It's kind of like what makes mayonnaise, and why, if you go to the grocery store, until you open it up, you don't have the refrigerator, it's shelf stable. Because, and if you did not know, mayonnaise does not by definition have dairy. If you, same thing with a creamy salad dressing, unless you're going to make like buttermilk ranch, it has emulsifiers, like egg yolks, which are emulsifiers, mustard, because they have lecithin, that's the emulsifier. That's what our body uses. You can do that cooking. Professional chefs make their own mayo and their own mayonnaise-based dressings. Whether it's a remoulade, which is basically tartar sauce. So, need pre-treatment with bile salts to break the large fat globules. The smaller one, then the lipases take over, breaking it down to the monoglyceride, the fat-free fatty acids. These are going to be coming into effectively, they're going to diffuse out, but effectively the processing forms these things called micelles, okay, bile salts and lecithin, as you can see here, and effectively the micelle is this sort of transportable fatty molecule, even in the bloodstream. I remember and these are what they call VLDLs. So I remember doing it when I was in medical school. And they were just, we're going to draw some bloods, and do anybody mind if we draw your bloods? We're going to take a look at you. And of course, I had a giant bag of greasy, old style potato chips. None of this oven baked stuff. We're talking greasy. Your hands are covered. I ate the whole thing, of course. I weighed like 260 pounds. That was just a stack. And I mean, they showed me the numbers off the chart. Because I had it within an hour before we went into the lab. My buddy we were learning how to draw bloods too at the same time. So so lipid products are converted back into triglycerides and packed with lecithin and lipoproteins forming what they call chylomicron. This is what was transported. These are the VLDLs themselves. They're exocytosed from the other side into the lacteal, eventually by way of the thoracic duct where they're not going to clog up the works. Then they make their way to the liver and get processed. So one of the neat things enters you by way of the arterial blood into the liver. So I mean that's what, and effectively what the liver does then changes those so we get the LDLs and the HDLs. So all those fractionated. Did you do any of this in like biochem lab? Did you fractionate lipids? To basically simulate things like the whole idea of the Framingham study. Back in 1980 was we were looking at the relationship between total cholesterol, and then we were looking at things like LDLs and HDLs. And so that was the ratio between the low density lipoproteins, the quote unquote bad cholesterol, which is not, the normal cholesterol laden lipoproteins versus the HDLs, the high density ones. And you can find the way they look chemically and how they're arranged almost anywhere. And the whole idea was what I'm doing more than I ever used to is, the HDLs come from one thing, exercise. And the ratio is LDLs to HDLs. So let's say my total cholesterol is good, like it's under 175. Then as you basically go, as you're exercising, you're increasing the denominator, which is the HDLs, reducing that ratio, because in those days, if the ratio was between 3 and 4 to 1, you were good. If you got up to higher, like maybe it was 100 and your LDL, your HDLs were like 30, okay. As it went to like 150 to 30, it's 5 to 1. Now you have a significant increase in the likelihood of cardiovascular event, meaning heart attack or stroke. So those are, I mean, it's all those little things, and really that's been the guideline for quite a long time. I do not know how accurate it is today. I haven't seen a cardiologist I haven't had to 20 years. The only thing that maybe start to change the diet again and do the exercising again is I didn't like my triglyceride fraction. It told me, but you didn't have to tell me. I'm sitting here, Badger's fault. But you know what he has in the office now? Mike and Ike's. I mean, I could eat the whole bag, and nothing would stop me, other than being people saying I was greedy. So like Mike, Dr. Dress and I were competing. Notice his body type is not the same. Just saying. When I first met Dr. Dress, you know what they would do here in the mornings over at the gym? A couple of days, play basketball. I came in like, my 8 o'clock lab, my 8 o'clock AAP labs. I was doing all the labs. So there he is, like 7:30 in the morning. I'm going to walk across the gym. He's with a bunch of the other faculty guys. They're shooting hoops. They're playing like 3-on-3, 4-on-4 games. Are you kidding me? Hey, Lou, maybe you can suit up next time. You're dreaming. None of you guys are interested in my life. Okay, once in the blood, the chylomicrons are broken into free fatty acids, etc., so they can be used by the cells. Again, and so we have, and obviously they are useful. They're an alternative energy source when we run out of carbs, etc., etc. A lot of this plays a role in the low carb diet. The whole idea is to try to utilize these things because they are less inflammatory. Carbohydrates, unfortunately, are very pro-inflammatory agents. And so when you're dealing with, like me, with an inflammatory oriented arthritis, it's useful to have this. And so you can take a look at this. I'm not going to read it to you. And there's really not a whole lot else to say about it. It's all covered in DNA and RNA. The interesting thing about this is where historically people were concerned about gout, because this is where you're going to find purines. And when purines, the nitrogenous waste of purines, which we only have a limited tolerance for, is uric acid. Okay, uric acid gets its name, the URI, from purines. Okay, so hydrolyzed nucleic acid to its nucleotide monomers, broken down effectively, phosphates and sugars we can use, transported in the villi that are there. And so they don't say a lot, but this is why they thought, we now know it has more of a processing thing. It's an enzyme lack. And I think unless they've changed it tremendously, I still think the go-to arm, and there's very good gout medicines, are xanthine oxidase inhibitors. Don't quote me. It was a long time ago when I was to prescribe those things, and very, very effective. And so we really, the notion that it was diet related kind of it was hereditarily based and very, very easy to treat. These are medicines that have minimal side effects comparatively. It's rare that you find something blood pressure to a certain extent as well today. And as we go over here with this, in the small intestine, you get a lot, again, fat-soluble vitamins into absorptive cells. And these, we always remember A, D, and K, water-soluble and are easy to bring in. Vitamin B12, now the intrinsic factor is used. That facilitates the endocytosis. And again, we have certain vitamin K and B vitamins also from the large intestine, where bacteria play an important role. So that's where the gut, again, not essential. We can get it up here. The vitamin B12, that's a significant feature. And electrolytes, there's all constantly transporting iron and calcium and duodenum, transporting ions, sodium absorption, typically co-transports or anti-transport. You can see, again, osmotic gradients are involved. And so whatever in there typically is absorbed. Okay, and so there's different things. Now, what's interesting is has to do, iron is interesting. When it's stored in these lining cells, it's called ferritin. And then we have to transport it because there's a certain amount of toxicity. There can be problems associated. And some folks will have, there's iron storage disorders. Uh, Depending on where you're going, you'll learn about one's called hemosiderosis, another one's called hemochromatosis. Remembering that because it's known as bronze diabetes, it causes iron deposits and it damages the pancreas, so they get actual diabetes. But the diabetes isn't it's from the pancreas being damaged by the iron, and the iron gets in under their skin, and they're bronze, they're healthy. And I remember this and answered a question on rounds when I was a student down in Virginia, doing a rotation in Virginia, that none of the residents there, the attending was a diabetologist. It's like, the next day I had a senior resident come up to me and pull me aside and goes, Lou, Dr. Arthur is the doctor. He wants to know why the podiatry student knows more than his residents. I said, wow. I said, I read a lot. It was my shoulder was injured and I couldn't pat myself on the back as easily as usual. So understand, some of the stuff I tell you, depending where you're going with your careers, you're going into a field, people are going to start asking little stuff like that. It sticks in your mind. Little names and things like that are winners. You impress people. You don't have to know a whole lot, but good memories help. Okay, water. Oh God. Small intestine, 95%. Large. So we're not designed to lose water. That's why diarrhea is such a problem. Vomit is such a problem. We use water. We use electrolytes. And then again, the very young and very old are the ones who are at risk. Malabsorption, anything causing that interferes with bile or the pain, because that's really where the absorption takes place. The lining, infections, antibiotics, of course. Most people are familiar with celiac. We hear a lot more about it. It's gluten sensitivity, an immunological reaction. These days, it is the beauty of what's happened today. We're very sensitive. When you go into, we were in Cancun. I was amazed. Every place we went out to eat, the first question they asked us about allergies, gluten sensitivity, lactose. They want to look. Their bread and butter is keeping us happy and healthy. Obviously, they know that. But the fact they were very attentive to all of that wherever we went. Everything was very clearly labeled and all that type of stuff. So so it's very easy today. I think with what we have at Mega Marts, you could handle almost any diet possible. Well, end of digestive. Thank you. Beginning of renal. So the boss said okay. I told her my itinerary. So you all remember, all but one remember. You get them all. So I don't want to sit here and review the urinary anatomy. We'll start where it starts to get important. So we're not going to talk anything about it. Big player here. Nitrogenous waste removal. That's job one. After that, water retention, concentrating the urine, retaining glucose, retaining things that are important, getting rid of things that are not. That's really what it is. So regulating ion concentrations, long-term acid-base balance. Most of the toxins, metabolic waste toxins and drugs are processed in the liver. The liver's job is to make them more water soluble. At that point, they're more easily excreted. It's like all those amino acids from deaminating proteins. They form ammonia. Ammonia is highly toxic. The liver turns it into urea, which is more water soluble and more easily excretable. A certain amount we can tolerate in our bloodstream. Those kinds of things. So we can live with creatinine. We can live with a certain amount of urea. But nitrogenous wastes are a problem. There are a limited number of substances, alcohol for one, some of which can be excreted intact respiratorily. So your big detoxification center is liver. Your big excretory arm is certainly the kidney, vis-a-vis the urine, and maybe the lungs can play a role with certain things we can exhale. Very interesting about that. So all that, yeah, we know about it, and they've got these flip-flops. You might remember erythropoietin is part of the regulates RBC production. The renin regulates blood pressure. Vitamin D is activated both in the kidney and is activated in the skin. Gluconeogenesis if needed, and then and effectively you have the kidneys. Remember, anatomically we have the kidneys, and now we have, and really the ureters, bladder, urethra. There's really no effective functionality to them. They are merely just a conveyance, as you recall, for urine. The bladder is a storage tank. It's only bad can happen. That's the problem. So vis-a-vis my bladder cancer from smoking, people with kidney stones, that type of stuff, typically, and certainly sexually transmitted diseases that impact that system. So it's only that affects the transport arm of that. Not going to review the anatomy, not where it's located, retroperitoneal. So this is just a side note. This is some of the things that you're very watchful. If you end up going into a clinical field, these are those interesting. Little notes like this are really important. Car crashes, even in the presence of airbags. I mean, we still have problems associated with it. There were more previously. I mean, and this is the other thing you look for. It's always so important if you're in an emergency room environment. You should collect urine. So I'm sure I told you the story about that guy who's an elderly gentleman with a full bladder walking across the street, got whacked by a car. We saw him, and all of a sudden we cathed him when we were doing the operation to take care of internal injuries. Blood all of a sudden everywhere. And I remember the attending turning around and talking to me, our assistant chief. He goes, "Lou," I said, "We've got a ruptured bladder here." So what's that mean? He says, "Well, he told the circulating nurse, and you have to be, if you're on call, you have to be within a half an hour of the hospital." Doctor, his name is Dr. Landau. He said, "Oh, he'll undoubtedly be here in a half an hour." Little things like that. And the next thing they got to do is they got to do urostomy tube and all that type of stuff. It is a big deal. Remember, it's cortex and medulla. Again, just like any other organ. The cortex is where the filtration. So if we were going to summarize what kidneys do. Basically, glomeruli, which are located in the exterior part, the cortex, they are the filtration arm. Then additionally, when we get into the tubular system, we have tubular reabsorption. And to finalize, what we're excreting is urine tubular secretion. Typically, these happen in the convoluted tubules, typically in order. Convoluted, remember the convoluted tubules. Proximal, for most of this happens, reabsorption and secretion, in the proximal convoluted tube. It's like the digestive tract. By the time it gets through by the time it's halfway through the jejunum, it's basically done. Same thing here. By the time it goes to the proximal convoluted tube, 2/3 of the work has been done. The tubular secretion occurs mostly in the distal, and it's really to finalize it. And then the other thing, and that's what we're going to talk about, which won't be today, probably Wednesday, is we start talking about that countercurrent multiplier and exchanger. That's all about concentrating the urine. That's very hard. Concentrate urine. And so it's very, very hard, but extraordinarily important to have at least a little understanding of that. I mean, it's such a I say it to every single class. I'm sure I said it to you. That's why the good Lord made nephrologists. Certain doctors are smart doctors. Smart doctors go into certain fields, cardiology, pathology, uh, oncology, hematology, nephrology. You know, they'll joke and say surgeons are not the smartest doctors, but they got great hands. It's very, very. I mean, there's no hard and steady rule, but sometimes it's like, oh my God, this is hard to. I don't know how they understand all this. So we're not going to go into all the things. You remember the calyces and the pyramids and all that good stuff. Not doing it. Not doing it. The important part we're going to get to is all sympathetic. Remember that. And the important part, remember, the blood, basically the arterial blood comes in. It goes up in between the pyramids by way of the columns. And then it arches over the cortex, all those areas. And then we begin to see straight lines radiate out. And what comes off of those are these about 1 million glomeruli. 85% of them are here in the cortex. About 15% are right on that border. Those are the juxtamedullary nephrons. They are the ones that do concentrating urine. Remember, the functional unit is the nephron. Remember, the nephron is where you have this tuft of capillaries, okay, that make up the glomerulus, these very permeable capillaries, fenestrated epithelia, little windows. We can adjust. It's just like your house or your apartment or your dorm. On a hot day, you can open the windows. If it's starting to get a little cooler, you can close the windows. That's what fenestrations are. They're little windows. And you can adjust. There's cells called podocytes that can adjust those openings to facilitate how much fluid comes in or how much fluid comes out in an effort to basically regulate blood pressure. It's very interesting how we do those things. As far as I know, they do not have air conditioning. One person, two people. Lauren's sitting going, I can't believe you said that stupid thing. Sydney's at least smiling. Malachi's got at least a smile. Everybody else is ignoring me, which is usual. I can forgive. What? You didn't get the joke? Didn't have air conditioning. The kidneys, it has windows but no air conditioning. Window units and air conditioners. Have you seen those before? Boy, I'm a stranger to stranger. Okay, so here, big thing here, functionality. What's this all about? Remember, we rely on pressure. Why? It goes the unique system from arterial blood going in and in other words, arterial blood going in, arterial blood going out, because the filtration is accomplished by the differentiation of pressure. Strictly pressure oriented. We're creating the filtrate the way you would any other way we create pressure, hydrostatic pressure. Heat the water, put it on top of your drip coffee maker, either automatically or using hot water and putting it in by hand, and let it drip through and filter through. So that's not temperature is helping with the extraction, but the pressure is coming from the weight of the water and its natural tendency of gravity to filter down. We're not expending any other energy than what's already in the system. So we're utilizing hydrostatic pressure, and the offset that's why it's a high pressure system. Those renal arteries, remember, I made a big deal out of it. They're wide. That allows for that. If they were smaller, we would not have enough pressure to really generate filtration. And to that end, the kidney pretty much controls itself. You and I don't have to really do a whole lot about it, short of maybe somebody has a certain amount of high blood pressure, common as you get older. Very useful medicines to take care of it, comparatively minimal side effects, if any. All of those kinds of things. And high blood pressure is very much lifestyle. Every so often, about 10% of people I would call essential have hypertension, secondary hypertension, where there's some underlying cause that creates it. What we call essential hypertension, the vast majority of people have. It's just something that they have. It's correctable. Diet, exercise, relatively easy to tolerate medicines, all that good stuff. Don't teach students who don't laugh at your jokes. That would help. Once we're talking about that, the secondary aspects, the absorption, the secretion, the concentrating in the urine, all of those are accomplished as it goes into, depending the rest of the nephron, as it goes through the proximal and distal convoluted tubules and the loops in the nephron. They are draped with or surrounded by capillary beds, and now you can see the transition from arterial blood to venous blood. That means it's an active process. The oxygen is used, the arterial blood is being used to fuel that process, and it requires, just like digestive, a lot. That's why, I don't know, by any standard, what, 40% of the blood that your heart's pumping out pretty much easily, maybe more, maybe 50%, particularly after a meal, or when you're sleeping, is going to GI and urinary. That's when we do most of the work. That's there. And then everything else is just a way of getting rid of it. Okay, nephrons, 1 million per kidney. The corpuscle, that's the glomerulus. We'll take a quick look at that anatomically for review. And then the tubular system, we'll take a look at that. So, fenestrated endothelium, okay? So these are simple squamous cells, unique because they have tiny holes, and again, little slits that can be adjusted. Porous, efficient filtrate. What's filtrate? Effectively, a fluid, basically plasma, missing proteins, which can't fit through, and any cellular or formed elements, red cells, white cells, platelets. If those things, proteins in the area, anything along those lines, proteins or formed elements are found in the urine, that's unusual. You'd have to find an underlying reason. It's not always a terrible reason, but you wonder about an underlying reason. So that's significant. And these days, you'll see as we get to the end of this, there's so many dipstick systems that give you a quick look-see. And depending on what you dipstick, then you do further testing. Is it sugar? Is it blood? Might it be bacteria, crystals? Maybe somebody has a stove. A lot of. Beauty, again, when we look at it, and why the system so important. Urines are easy. You don't have to stick somebody. It's non-invasive to collect the urine. Anytime you can do something where it's not being invasive to get a read on what's going on. With one stick and a urinalysis, you can get one tube. You can get a CBC and one tube. Enough blood to load a second tube for basic metabolic panel and a urine happy dance. If somebody's sick, it's unless it's something weird. So, very efficient filtrating system. The name of the capsule, this is anatomy, Bowman's capsule. It's a suction. Again, to me, it's like a series of funnels. This is the start of the funnel, but it's a funnel that surrounds that tuft of capillaries. So as they effectively spray out, none of it are lost. They're surrounded by this capsule, and the stem of that capsule starts tubular system. So you have first proximal, convoluted because it's twists and turns, some kind of loop, either long or short. That depends on which nephron it's from. Whether it's cortical nephrons, which basically they're all involved in the chemicals, electrolytes, glucose, various things, versus water concentration. Those are the juxtamedullary nephrons. Then the capillaries are draped over those long loops, nephron loops, which are also, and the name that you might encounter down the road, loops of Henle, capital Henle. No why. Like the guy from the Eagles who died. Eagles? Not like, soft rock eagles, or canyon eagles.
California?
Yeah, absolutely. Take it easy. Little eagles. As my wife would tell me, that's elevator music. She's like, I don't. That's why she tells me, keep plugged in. I don't want to hear your elevator music. This is what I have to play. I have to remind myself, this is the relationship I have chosen. You couldn't put up with me. I thought it was a clean shirt. You sure there's no grease on your shirt? I said, I just washed it. Got it out, it looked nice. Went to the shower. There's grease on your shirt. I hope nobody notices that. She could care less if I'd make fun of it. Okay, moving on. So don't worry about the layers or the foot processes, adjust the slits, don't care. You can see these openings there, the fenestrations are here in the epithelial cell. These can adjust and facilitate how much is coming through. And again, it's not long. It's less than an inch and a half. Single layer of epithelial cells. Each region, this is histology, what the tissues look like tell you function. That's important. The proximal convoluted tubule closest to the Bowman's capsule, really the stem of it. Then a loop is a long or short. Then the distal, farthest away, farthest in the sense of length away from the start of those tubules, not necessarily farthest away from the capsule itself, because these structures are quite close together. And then multiple of these convoluted distal tubules go into collecting ducts. So in the proximal, the hallmark cell for most of these, and it's very, are simple cuboidal. These have a lot of microvilli. What does that mean when you have a microvilli and a brush border like digestive? There's a lot of business. That means brush borders mean surface area. There's a lot of stuff moving in and out. And you're going to see they have a lot of mitochondria. That means they're busy because this is an active transport process. So we're gobbling up the oxygen and the energy here. They do both reabsorption, secretion. They're in the cortex. So I mean, this is even if it's an artist's rendition. That's a lot of mitochondria per, let's say per surface area. That's there, and a lot of microvilli, infolded, basolateral membrane. There's lots of surface area, incoming and outgoing. So the vast majority of the reabsorption, and frankly, the vast majority of the secretion is accomplished. That we even reabsorb materials to create a concentration gradient like urea to excrete later. So you're utilizing co-transport and anti-transport. That's part of it. The loop, and technically the loop of Henle is the long loop. Remember, the descending limb is always thin, permeable to water. The ascending limb, thicker, diameter we're speaking of, and impermeable to water, but able to actively transport in various solutes. That comes into play not today, but perhaps Wednesday when we actually start to discuss this remarkable exchanger and multiplier system. Nephron loop, simple squamous, again, relatively thin. Show you the distal convoluted tubule, different, less activity. It's mostly secretion. Yeah, there's still going to be a little bit of reabsorption. That reabsorption is typically triggered by things like antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone. So it's chemically mediated by design. And so they're not doing nearly as much processing, so you're not going to see the abundance of mitochondria. So here you have less mitochondria, certainly from the artist's rendition, a whole lot less, but to try to give you an idea. Still simple cuboidal. And this is what they look at here. This is a classic. You might remember saying this. These are tubules. Circular nuclei point to cuboidal. These are all the simple squamous cells that make up the glomerulus. This is the capsule, the space that surrounds it. There's nothing else microscopically that looks quite like that in the human body. And when we look at tissue sections, a fancy word is histology. When we look at cells, it's cytology. So when you say histological, it means you're looking at a particular tissue. So, and again, tubules and collecting ducts, water and sodium balance. I'm not worried so much about principal or intercalated cells. Okay, not a big deal. The collecting ducts themselves are just that. They're collecting the processed filtrate, which is going to become the urine, okay, from multiple inputs. That's all. And they have that striped appearance. So there's not a whole lot to say with any of that stuff. See, it's not that far apart. These guys are close together. Okay, from here to here, they're all pushed against each other, because you might remember the next thing we discussed is that juxtaglomerular apparatus, which you should review. Okay, 85% cortical, and this is basically the review. Juxtamedullary, the rest, that's the concentration aspect. This is the reclamation of stuff we've got to keep back in and stuff we have to get rid of. That's really sort of the division of labor, so to speak. And you can see it here with the illustration. Here, the capillaries, which we call peritubular, around the tubes, proximal and distal convoluted tubules, they're reabsorbing elements back either immediately or subsequently back into the bloodstream. And by doing so and expending oxygen for this transport process, become effectively transitioning arteriovenous blood. Here, same deal, except it's happening here in this long loop. We call these the vasa recta. Recta is straight, vasa is vessel, and so they're straight vessels. The best word to describe it is draped over those long loops of heaven. Got it? Good. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Afferent, efferent, we covered that. Don't have to talk about that. Anatomically, the afferent or incoming arteriole are a little wider. Yeah, and the resistance there, again, it's a high pressure system, and most of the control is going to be there. That's the auto control. We talked about the physiology. We went over this a little bit. We talked about the anatomy. As long as you're mean, remember what mean arterial pressure is. Okay, that's a question. Mum's the word. Mum. Galaxy Quest. Galaxy. Oh. Dr. Badger and I have the same fascination with science fiction stuff. It's one of the great all-time silly movies. You guys never saw it. They still have Galaxy Quest conventions. The premise is like a canceled Star Trek show that the stars keep going to these conventions, and the young people don't even know who they are, could care less. They're a bunch of a-holes. And they're magically transported to another solar system, because when the television series were picked up when they went into the airwaves, okay, imagine like going out into the internet, were picked up by this culture who thought they were historical documents and recreated this whole. It's freaking brilliant. Just unbelievable. Oh, Stranger in a Strange Land. Go find it, watch it, you'll love it. Trust me, you'll love it. The late Alan Rickman, Professor Snape. Okay, you Harry Potter people. That was another movie series. Maybe you heard of it. God, am I the only one? What hobbies do you have that I don't have? I may have studying and drinking. Drinking, I can understand. Well, for some of you, that's certainly a hobby. Navigation.
There's a lot of good people in that movie.
Oh my gosh, Alan Rickman's there. Tim the Tool Man, is there. Sigourney Weaver plays. She's wearing like a bustier, and she's constantly got half of her outfit torn open. So she's basically playing what she was years when she came out. Everybody found her in the Alien in 1980. So she's looking like that, nearly 20 years later. A very, beautiful woman, very talented actress. but she gets to play that neat part. Like I get to play the babe, that type of thing. And it's hysterical. Look at the people in the cast. The guy who plays it, who ended up winning an Academy Award, he's a great character actor. He plays this sort of dweeby guy. He always gets killed in the Star Trek episode. What's his name? Sam.
Rockwell.
Brilliant. He's brilliant. Oh, you gotta see this movie. I digress. Okay. Okay. Moving on. So blood pressure is high. The afferent arterioles, capillaries, okay, are porous, the vasa recta. It's actually what it looks like. You see the proximity of all these things. Afferent arterioles, glomeruli, and then all of these tubular structures are intimately associated with it. So this is the first bit of physiology to remember. Juxtaposition, and when I said about mean arterial pressure, remember, let's say 120/80, we take the pulse pressure, the difference between them, 40, we divide it by 1/3 and add it to the diastolic. So that would be a mean arterial pressure. It's done so because about only 1/3 of the time, 2/3 of the time is relatively speaking at rest, 1/3 of the time is at the high level. Just to calculate the mean, that's the science or the logic behind it. So the average or mean pressure is 93.3. Okay, a lot of people, it's not, we don't average it and say, oh, it's 120/80, the average is in the middle. It's not. It's more often lower than it is higher. So this is modifications. You either be in the ascending limb of the nephron loop, sometimes in the afferent arteriole, and it has two players. Okay, it has chemoreceptors for salt. Okay, it has these specialized smooth muscle cells called granular cells that are mechanical receptors. And what the granules that they secrete are that renin we have talked about multiple times that activates that renin, angiotensin, aldosterone mechanism, which you should know by now, and if not, review it. We've gone over it a number of times. It's so terribly important. Renin, produced here, activates angiotensinogen. The angiotensinogen, again, is a precursor inactive in the bloodstream. The renin converts it to angiotensin 1. And then at that point, by the time it gets to the lungs have what's called angiotensin converting enzyme. We often use the acronym ACE for people who take something called ACE inhibitors. For blood pressure, one is known as lisinopril, is probably the most common one of those. That's the generic name. And then that activates it into angiotensin 2. That's the active form. What does angiotensin do? It tenses the blood vessels. So it immediately raises blood pressure by making the arteries tighter. It increases thirst, so you retain water. It increases the antidiuretic hormone, which basically is going to reabsorb water down at like those, I was talking about the distal convoluted tubules. Water will move, and most importantly, aldosterone. Now, aldosterone, remember, inserts into the distal convoluted tubule, even into the collecting ducts, little openings that are designed to pull sodium, and then water follows it. We don't have to do science rule again. Okay, all good. And in between them, between the arteriole itself, gap junctions so the signals can be passed. And so they're working on basically adjusting it if the salt levels are high. Relatively speaking, you're probably going to need more water in the system. If the salt levels are low, you probably have to get rid of some water. Okay, the pressure sensors are being triggered. The blood pressure is too high. We have to reduce it. So you're going to either release renin or you're not going to release renin. And so that's the artist's rendition, and it's probably as good as anything. You can see the afferent arteriole incoming, but the arrow is larger. You can see here are granular cells here. These are the chemoreceptors. These are the pressure receptors that are there. And here are these sort of in-between cells. So the granular cells are here, I beg your pardon. The denser cells are here, and the signals by these mesangial, I think of messaging cells. Voila. Important, we generate not 180 fluid, typical person. 6 liters of blood. It passes through our kidneys 30 times a day. We generate 99% of the plasma is effectively creates this 180 liters of fluid. We basically reclaim, I beg your pardon, 99% of that filtrate. The 1% that's left over is right about here, 1.5 liters, 1.5 to 2 liters average. Most of it we go, depending on how hydrated or lack thereof, 5-7 times a day on average. Some more, some less. It depends. So the kidney entire plasma volume 60 times a day. 20-25% of oxygen at rest. I mean, and you heard me comment on it. That's why when people are on dialysis, they wonder how you can sit for 4 hours and be exhausted. It's exhausting. Because not only that's taking over the kidney, but you have the blood has to be gone to an outside source and pushed back in. It puts a tremendous strain on people. And maybe it's changed today. My first wife worked at a dialysis unit for about a year. We had just been married, and then until we moved, and I went to practice. So it's filtrate minus blood and plasma proteins, the urine 1%, waste, unneeded substances, etc. Here are the things I told you about. They just show, and they're giving you an idea of what happens where. You can look at that. Okay. Passive. All these things we talked about already. Same kind of thing. Here's that capsule that surrounds it so impressively. Here are the slit. These are where you can adjust these filtration slits, which will affect some of the filtrate as well as the fenestrated epithelium. You can see the fenestrations and the filtration slits. As the slits are open, more comes out. If they're closed, less comes out. Actually, what they look like micrographically, etc., etc. So look what can go through it. Macromolecules are engulfed by mesangial cells, while its molecules smaller than 3 nanometers. Look what's in there. Glucose, nitrogenous waste, amino acids. Okay, the proteins maintain the colloid osmotic pressure. And then if you do crunch the numbers, remember what it was at tissue. When we looked at a tissue, it was about 35. This is 55. That's because those wide arteries do that. Oops, pardon me. And so compared to that, so 35, 25, 26. And so when you crunch the math, you have an outgoing force of 10. Okay, and so that controls what we call GFR, glomerular filtration rate. That's the determining factor whether somebody has failed kidneys. And so it should be approximately 125 millimeters a minute, as I recall. We'll see here. And we estimate it with blood tests. I showed you my blood test. From your blood test, you can do an estimate based on what's in your blood. And it's a very good snapshot for your family doc, your internist, whoever's looking at it to go, oh, your kidneys are working. Fine, mine. What they do with a lot of people is they will actually have them collect, if there's a concern, 24-hour urine. So give them a dose of a substance that your body neither absorbs or metabolizes in any way, shape, or form. So whatever they put in you, you're going to get rid of. So you know the amount that went in, and over 24 hours, we know the amount that's supposed to come out, and you calculate it from that. So it's like a plant, I think it's inulin, INULIN, it's a plant polysaccharide, and we have stuff like that we need to absorb. So here they show you the pictures, it's fine, net filtration on the other side, here's that 125 mils per minute, and all of these things. So pressure is the big player, surface area plays a role, filtration permeability plays a role. This is all, the constancy are these renal autoregulation. So increased glomerular filtration. So what happens? You have more urine output, it's going to lower your blood pressure. We want more in there, The more filtrate we create, the more urine we're getting. So if we have an overabundance, if there's a fluid overload, we're filtrating. Open the afferent artery. If there's not enough, close it. Okay. Moreover, if we open the afferent, sometimes we even close the efferent because the longer it's in there, the more fluid, the longer that stuff is going around those glomeruli, the more filtrate. The more filtrate, we lose more water. And so the whole idea for all of these mechanisms, whether it's renin-angiotensin, whether it's the absence of fight or flight, all of these are designed to maintain. So the goal of the extrinsic controls, when they're necessary, is to maintain the blood pressure. This is a maintenance system. We're not supposed to worry about it. So unless you're an idiot who smoked for 40 years, was chronically overweight, never exercised, and ate anything, including unlimited Mike and Ikes, you shouldn't have to worry. You're all young and healthy and vigorous, bored stiff. Look, they pay me to teach this shit. Sorry about that. It's getting to the end of the semester. I'm tired. I only have to deal with 12 of you guys next time. I don't have any more yet. Dirty doesn't.
For anatomy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have to give them names. That's it. If you didn't see that movie, go see that movie. It's great. Not even good. What? Dirty Dozen. Oh yeah. I mean, that was a game changer. Game changer. All these Charles Bronson, Lee Marvin. Oh my God. Young John Cassavetes. First time we saw Donald Sutherland, Kiefer's father. Oh my God. Intrinsic controls, auto-regulation, maintaining it. Again, the map, as long as it's between 80 and 180, we're good. And there's different mechanisms that can be, there's feedback mechanisms. I don't want to go crazy about this. These are the kinds of things. Obviously, smooth muscle contracts when it's stretched, so it constricts the afferent arterioles. If it restricts blood flow, protects them against high blood pressure. Decreased dilates them, so they respond to the pressures against them, trying to protect the kidneys and doing. And like I said, as long as it's in that, that's a pretty good range, 80 to 180. So when someone goes into shock, it means it's gone way below a map of 80. So even somebody who's like 60 over 100 over 60, unless it's their normal, like a lot of particularly women and particularly slender women, a lot of them 100 over 60. My wife has 110 over 60. So off the top, I mean, you're dealing with maybe a map of around 77, 78. If that's your normal, it's okay. Having low blood pressure, if that's your normal, we don't go crazy about that. It's when somebody goes into shock, it's like I had it when I was sick and ended up in ICU. I had a palp of 80. I mean, they couldn't get the blood pressure without palpating it, which means they can't hear it. And they only could feel it when the blood started flowing. When it was at 80. I'm not. Hi, you're going to ICU. All those types of things. Feedback mechanisms. Again, filtrate sodium chloride concentration, decrease reabsorption, causing high. So again, it depends whether you want to lower it, whether you want to raise it, essentially. So you understand those. Extrinsic sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic, nothing to do with it. It's all about controlling blood vessel diameters. It's a very, very, very important point. So as you can see, those extrinsic controls will override, and that's what we do with fight or flight, redirect. Extremely low blood pressure, etc., epinephrine and norepinephrine, all those things. And here's the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. Very important to review that, look through all those. Other factors. Renal arteries such as adenosine, prostaglandin. So, for instance, you'll increase it, the amount, and so generally when we block adenosine, like we do adenosine receptors, like we do with caffeine, what it tends to do is we You have a couple cups of coffee in the morning, you're running to the bathroom. Okay, it's altering your globin, it's basically encouraging the production of urine that's there. So, I mean, all of that, those are just general things. Uh, Less than 50 a day, that's somebody that, now you're doing people who are shocky, variety of things, transfusion reactions, crush injuries, etc., etc. We will deal with the countercurrent system on Wednesday. Thank you very much. 5:28. I want to thank you for not obviously snoring or sleeping when we were here in class.